Perfect. And I'm going to start admitting folks. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. We will just be getting started in a few moments. So if you'll just sit back, relax, and if you want to put your name and where you're calling in from in the chat, that would be wonderful, just so we know where everyone is on this beautiful afternoon. And as I said, welcome everyone. We're so glad to have you here today. We're going to be getting started in just a moment. So just sit back and relax. And if you want to put your name in the chat, as well as the town that you're calling in from, and if you have a particular title on a committee or are a local elected official and you want to put that in the chat, feel free to do that as well. Just wait for folks who are joining in a little bit later. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're just going to be getting started in 1 or 2 more minutes. So in the meantime, if you want to put your name and where you're calling from in the chat, so that we know where folks are calling in from on this fine afternoon, that would be great. And we'll be getting started in just a moment. Excellent. Well, I think most of the folks who have joined or who are going to join have joined. So I think we will go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here today, and welcome to MCAN's event on the benefits of the Property Assessed Clean Energy Program, also known as PACE. My name is Logan Malik, and I'm the Clean Energy Director here at MCAN, and I'm really, really excited about the event that we have put together for you all. So we have 2 excellent and amazing presenters who are going to discuss a program that MCAN believes really offers substantial benefits to communities that choose to opt into this program, which is of course PACE. And so we hope that during this event you come to the same conclusion, and you know, we're going to be discussing several things today, specifically how this program works, how communities can go about opting into the program, as well as the benefits that community members and communities stand to gain through opting into this program. But before we get into that, I just want to go through a few of the basics and just logistics for today. So first and foremost, I will ask you all to please stay muted. You came into the call muted, and unless I got something wrong, I don't believe you will be able to unmute yourself. But if in the rare instance that you are able to unmute yourself, unless you're, specifically called on to ask a question, I would just really ask that you stay muted for the duration of the presentation. If you haven't already, please share your name and the town or city that you're calling in from in the chat, so that we know where everyone is located on this fine afternoon and where they're calling in from. We are recording this webinar. We have already started the recording. So if you would like to not be in that, or, just feel free to turn your camera off to avoid that. We will be sending out the recording to all of the folks who registered for this event. So if you want to rewatch something, there was a particular piece of information that you want to make sure that you fully understand. If you want to send this to, another member of your local officials, or you want to send this to another community member, you will be able to do that. And as we're going through the presentations, we will have a Q&A at the end, but I would ask folks to just feel free to drop any questions that you have into the chat. Those questions are the ones that we're going to get to first. So feel free to ask a question as things are going on, and we will do our best to get to as many questions as possible at the end. Our agenda today is as follows. Of course, we will have a welcome and an introduction from me. We will then turn things over to Wendy OMalley, who's going to talk about what the PACE program is and how it benefits the communities that opt into it. We are then going to be hearing from Carol Collins and learning a little bit about, how PACE operates, in a community. And we're going to get to hear about a specific example in Greenfield. And then, as I mentioned, we will get to Q&A that will be facilitated by me. And I'll go to questions that came in from the chat first, and then to any questions that folks have as the Q&A is ongoing. So with that, I just want to briefly talk about who MCAN is and why we chose to put on this event. MCAN is a nonprofit organization with over 65 chapters across the state. And we are really focused on facilitating municipal level climate action. And, we really work to empower local chapters, local advocates, local community members, and local officials by enhancing communication, promoting town level projects that improve communities, and decreasing climate change causing pollution. For us, it's all about local action. We believe that this is where the most powerful change happens, and that as a result of local change, that's where we see the best state level change, federal change. It all comes from the local level. And in many ways, that's why this program aligns so nicely with our agenda and our goals as an organization. And so, when it came to thinking about why hold this event, why talk about the PACE program, we have heard now for several months about the desire from local officials across the state, in MLP communities and investor-owned utility communities, wanting to learn more about exactly what this program is. And, when you look at it, PACE is a program that is easy to implement. It has very few costs for municipalities, and it offers a whole bunch of potential benefits for the communities that opt in. So the way that we view this is that this is another valuable tool in a municipality's toolbox when they're thinking about their efforts and how they go about mitigating the climate crisis. And we really see this program as beneficial to every single community across the Commonwealth. There is no community that, to my knowledge, I would ever say, this doesn't work for you. But it is important to note that there are some communities that this program could be particularly powerful for. And there's two types that I want to highlight to you today, though I'm sure that this this is not all inclusive of communities that could benefit from the PACE program. But the first type are communities with a lot of commercial buildings or multifamily housing buildings in their community. This program really works to serve those entities in your communities. And a lot of times, the programs, a lot of times those actors in particular need additional incentives to increase energy efficiency and to transition to clean energy. PACE does exactly that. And that's why we think that this is really beneficial for those communities. The second type of community that we think that this could be particularly beneficial for are communities that are served by municipal light plants. And this is an area that MCAN works a whole lot in, so we may be biased, but municipal light plants are regulated differently, or municipal light plant communities are regulated differently than communities that are served by your national grids and your Eversources. And there also are different programs that they have access to, or that they do not have access to, that kind of differs from those communities. In particular, communities that are served by municipal light plants don't have access to some of the incentives that are available through the Mass Save program. And as a result, they may not, and some of them absolutely do, but they may not have a robust energy efficiency program and incentives for commercial and multifamily housing actors in their community. So again, this is a particularly valuable piece of your toolbox if you are one of these two types of communities, and something that MCAN would strongly consider you looking into, particularly because, as Wendy will discuss in just a moment, the costs are pretty low and the benefits are potentially very, very high. So with that, I am going to turn things over to Wendy, and that will just take 1 second while I set up the slides. Just give me one moment. So Wendy OMalley is the PACE Massachusetts program manager and a vice president at MassDevelopment. She has been here and she has been working on PACE since it was approved to be administered in the state of Massachusetts. Her and her team are doing an awesome job in reaching out to communities and supporting communities, both in opting into this program, as well as going through the steps once you do opt into this program of actually getting projects off the ground. And so with that, I will go ahead and pass it over to you, Wendy, to get into the details.
Great. Thank you, Logan. Thank you for that wonderful introduction and for setting the table on why PACE Massachusetts is important. And I really believe it's going to make a huge impact on incentivizing owners to move forward with their energy efficiency or renewable energy projects. So next slide, please. So as Logan said, I work for MassDevelopment. If you're not familiar with who MassDevelopment is Massachusetts Development Finance Agency. We are a state agency that promotes economic development throughout the Commonwealth. There are a range of programs that we offer that you may be familiar with for real estate and financing options. We work statewide, we have regional teams, and we're really proud of the financings and real estate accomplishments that we achieved last year. Next slide. So, as Logan mentioned, PACE is a great new tool for commercial property owners to use here in Massachusetts. It is a financing option for commercial and industrial property owners to allow them to finance energy improvements, energy efficiency, and renewable energy improvements, and repay them through a special betterment assessment that they are billed and collected on their property tax bills. And quickly, if you're not familiar with betterment assessments, they have been a tool that's been used historically to fund public improvement projects. So PACE, it brings a public benefit, and that's why betterment assessments are used on this program. And we'll get into the details of that later on. But there are a number of benefits, not just to the property owners who access this program, but the municipalities who are hosting the projects, as well as the lenders and the capital providers participating in providing the funds. But I know here we have a municipal audience, so that's what I'm going to focus on in terms of why this is important. But to tie it into what Logan mentioned earlier, there are a number of old aged buildings here in Massachusetts. And they need improvements in terms of the heating, the cooling, the way they use power. Property owners approach MassDevelopment when they're doing renovations, when they're rehabbing their buildings. And then we have a lot of other owners who are just looking to make those types of improvements for a number of reasons. And so here, PACE gives them a tool to actually fund those improvements by using the savings identified over a longer period of time to invest in their buildings, to improve their buildings in a way that reduces the energy usage or shifts it to a more cleaner producing component. So here, there's not a lot of funding, I believe, in Massachusetts for larger commercial projects to install these types of improvements. And PACE gives them a unique way to move forward on projects that have been identified to pay for themselves over time. Things like solar panels, HVAC upgrades, and I'll detail that going forward. But the municipalities in which these properties are located in, a lot of them have either policies, or they have mandates, or they just have a general mission to try to improve the energy in their community. So here, PACE allows them to give the property owners an incentive to reduce the energy usage in their building without funding it directly, because this is third-party financing, and incentivizes them to improve their business in a way that hopefully will generate more economic development as well. Next slide, please. So Logan mentioned this is a program that was introduced in Massachusetts. It's actually been available nationally for quite a few years. Massachusetts did initially approve a statute back in 2016. There are some issues with that, and so we really weren't able to open the program until quite a few years later. I've been with the program since the beginning. We have structured it after a number of other successful programs. And when you look at this slide, what I'd like you to see is the opportunity. As Logan mentioned, I don't really think there is a community that this doesn't apply to. If you look at the types of buildings that can use PACE and where it's been successful, I think you can grasp the opportunity, hopefully in your community, for where PACE can be used. But just over $2 billion has been financed as of 2021 for just over 2,500 projects, PACE nationally. So that's a type of uptake I think we can see in Massachusetts potentially in the future, now that we're really rolling out PACE. Next slide, please. So here in New England, Connecticut, Rhode Island are programs that have been active and have closed a number of deals much before Massachusetts and led the way. So a lot of people may be familiar with those programs. We each have a little bit of a different statute, and that's what I'd like to point out to this audience. So Massachusetts, we have a little bit of different guidelines and structure than Rhode Island, Connecticut, but we're all trying to incentivize commercial property owners to move forward on projects. Next slide, please. So here in Massachusetts, MassDevelopment is the program administrator that basically heads up the PACE program. But we do work in consultation with the Mass Department of Energy Resources, who some of you may already be familiar with through the Green Communities Program, which DOER, as they're better known as, also participates in and administers. So we work with them in creating the guidelines under which the projects are approved. And there are a number of financial and technical guidelines that a property owner needs to meet for their project in order for this to move forward. on a program basis. So if you're not familiar with the guidelines, I'd welcome you to go to the website that you see here, massdevelopment.com/PACE. You can get all the information for the program and all the references on our landing page. Next slide, please. I mentioned that this is Repaid, and this is a unique program because it uses a betterment assessment in terms of repaying the financing to a third-party capital provider that the property owner chooses, and they're voluntarily agreeing to repay the financing through. A betterment assessment has to be billed and collected by law in the same way that property taxes are billed and collected. So MassDevelopment did not have an option to go outside a municipality in terms of how this is done. So I want to emphasize that if we could have, we would have left the municipality out in terms of billing and collection, but by law, we have to do it this way. So we've tried to create a structure that really creates the least amount of effort for a municipality to participate, as it's been previously said. It is a pass-through, this betterment assessment. So this graph is intended to represent the flow of funds, where the property owner is remitting the assessment payment with the property taxes to the municipality. And only if the municipality receives the PACE assessment from the property owner would you be required to then disperse it to the MassDevelopment paying agent that we've engaged. And that paying agent will then individually send the betterment assessments to each capital provider or lender in the program. And so that is how it works. We're not asking, again, the municipality to loan any money. MassDevelopment is not issuing any bonds or using any public funds to finance this. This is all a voluntary program. Next slide, please. So we talked about the types of properties on that previous graph that can be used, but specifically here in Massachusetts, the statutes by law allows commercial and industrial properties. And here are a few examples. And I think you're all familiar with office buildings, hotels, restaurants, manufacturers, all big power users in the commercial world. But it also has applicability to some residential housing. If it is multifamily, 5 units or more, it can be used for PACE. And so that's a really nice, interesting component of PACE where it expands maybe the definition that you may be familiar with normally for commercial buildings. We also have an eligibility for nonprofit buildings, but the nonprofit would have to agree to have a tax bill issued to them by the municipality in which they're located. And so that would have to be something that's done separately, and that would have to be the pathway for a nonprofit to use the program, and they'd have to agree to talk with their host municipality to use PACE. So I mentioned that as a side note. Next slide, please. This is for existing buildings only, and as you can see, it does cover a wide range of energy improvements. And so for someone like me who's been in the energy space for a long time now, I initially started out working with property owners who identified these types of improvements but didn't have funding to do them. They've realized the benefits, they realized the savings, but they had priorities in terms of funding what they needed to do with their businesses. And when you need to make the widgets, you need to pay the people, you need to do the things that are really, priorities at your business, the energy improvements kind of fall down lower on the list, even if they pay for themselves, even if they make perfect sense. They piecemeal them together. As things fail, they replace them. They do the best they can with the funds they have at that time. Here, we're hoping for property owners to do a more comprehensive project with PACE financing, because it allows them to look at the building more holistically, to look at funding measures that have longer paybacks that normally wouldn't maybe pay for themselves, and couple them with things that have more generous incentives and paybacks. And so they can do a better project, hopefully doing energy efficiency coupled with renewable energy, maybe installing a new roof on their building with the savings, which has really, I will say, been a really popular option that we've been receiving a lot of inquiries about, because this is longer term financing up to 20 years. You can include a lot more measures, I believe, in a project than a property owner would normally consider. when doing these types of energy efficiency and renewable energy installations. Next slide, please. I won't spend too much time on this because this is what Carol's going to be talking about, but this was what our first project that we closed, and really proud of it in the city of Greenfield. And they really enabled us to allow this property owner to think really big in terms of what they were going to do with the renovation of this building, because they knew PACE was going to be available for them when they needed it. Next slide, please. And this is the second project that we've closed in the city of Boston. So this is for a warehouse type commercial facility building, something you'd more traditionally think about in the Metro Boston area, right near the airport. And they house a bunch of retail tenants, different tenants like Starbucks, JetBlue, Airways. And what they needed is HVAC upgrades. The developer needed funding because they were having failing equipment, and they were just replacing them and intended to replace them one at a time. What PACE allowed them to do is look at replacing them all at one time without using their capital expense budget. And so they could preserve that for other expenses that they knew were coming up, and still did all the improvements at once. And we actually have this looking at another project at another one of their properties, because that's what you kind of see, I think, in PACE is a property owner does one financing and they really do see the benefits, and they start using it on multiple properties that they own. But you can see this financing was not for a huge amount. What I like about this is, everybody likes the big deals, but here, you're looking at just under $800,000 that was financed over 20 years. And I think that's really a big opportunity here in Massachusetts, where, there's not a lot that addresses the kind of smaller to medium commercial projects, and PACE does that. Next slide, please. So, here for the municipal audience, one of the key components of PACE is there's a one-time opt-in required by the community in order to allow community owners to participate in PACE. That's done by a vote of the city council or the select board, a one-page resolution that MassDevelopment has drafted, and that's read and voted on by the city council or select board in order to opt in and formally allow participation. And that's really important because a lot of times property owners, developers, whoever's looking at doing these projects, they're thinking forward in the future. They're looking at what's available, and they may never contact MassDevelopment or your community to see if PACE is available. They may just go to our website. And if you're not listed, they'll say, you know what, I'm going to kind of put that away as an option, and I'll maybe I'll reduce the project that I'm doing, or I won't be able to do what I really wanted to because I don't have that funding. I can't fit it in, wait for the community to opt in. If they know it's available, I think that just really facilitates the program uptake and the property owners considering it. And here it's 20-year financing. So that's important. A lot of the alternative financing terms available to property owners are 10 years or less, and they're direct loans. Because PACE is repaid via a betterment assessment, it doesn't impact a property owner's credit or borrowing ability the way a direct loan would. And that's important for commercial property owners, because again, they want to preserve their borrowing ability for more important, what they think are priority items to their business. So here, doing a 20-year project repaid through the energy savings identified under the guideline requirements allows them to have a positive cash flow. Because under that, that is a requirement of the program. A project cannot be approved by MassDevelopment and the DOER if it does not meet that energy cost savings requirement. There is no limit for the maximum financing amount as long as it's supported by the savings. There is a minimum target amount, I will say though, that the projects are intended to finance, 250,000 or above. I know that's been a concern by municipalities. Is this going to be something that's going to be a huge amount of effort in terms of property owners wanting to use it? And I think just by that amount alone, you can see that might narrow down the pool of eligible projects. It does still give you a wide opportunity in terms of the impact it can make and who it can be used by, but it's not something that applies to every single property in your municipality. And in terms of what's eligible, there is a retroactive component in terms of allowing improvements that were funded outside of PACE prior to when PACE was available and when the program opened. So back when times were better, maybe when an owner could fund something with alternative means, even with cash. And now they'd like to access that during what are not such good times. That has been something that's been of popular interest here at MassDevelopment when we receive inquiries. And I'll say the other thing that's really interesting about PACE is 20 years is a long time to commit to for financing. So property owner often won't move forward on an energy project because they don't know what's going to happen with 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line. And why should they be on the hook for paying for all these improvements for this building and not necessarily being around to see the energy cost savings? And that's why PACE makes sense, because the energy cost savings over time are intended to fund the betterment assessment that is used to repay the financing. And because you have 20 years and a combination of hopefully tax credits, incentives, avoided energy costs, and other savings that are repaying that original financing or investment cost, you now can see why a property owner might be incentivized to use PACE. And because it's an assessment, it automatically transfers if a property sold by law. And that's really important because the property owner who's running the system, seeing the energy savings, they're the ones repaying the assessment. That's why the PACE assessment and the PACE lien travel or are tied to the property, as we call it. So this is financing that runs with the land or is tied with the property, as more popularly described, instead of being tied to the borrower. So a borrower does not have to pay it off if the property is sold. Next slide, please. So I mentioned this is an application and a project process that is run by MassDevelopment and DOER. We do not expect the municipality to review project applications or do approvals. We're not asking you to do that. We're just asking you to facilitate the projects by allowing property owners to access the program. I won't go through a number of these details because these are really part of the structure of the program, but what I will emphasize here is that because it's an assessment and a lien, it does have to be recorded at the registry. We at MassDevelopment and the Program Council engaged in the closing transaction prepares all the documents. They record and facilitate the lien efforts at the registry. We do not expect the municipality to do that either. We are sensitive to the fact that you really do not have staff to do PACE efforts. In terms of these responsibilities. So I do want to emphasize that we are the ones at MassDevelopment who would be responsible for that. And instead of getting into the details of the enforcement and default, I'll let you read that and you can always, we can talk about that in terms of the question and answer. Next slide, please. So we've had quite an interest in the municipalities that have already opted in to date. 52, and most recent, I think, was Dudley. So I will call them out in terms of congratulations to Dudley for your most recent opt-in. You've all opted in for a variety of reasons. Some of you have been really progressive in terms of your climate policies and wanting to be greener and incentivizing owners. So you approached us and asked us to come and help you opt in. Some of you had developers, property owners who came to MassDevelopment and said, we want to use PACE. Can you go to this municipality and tell them you would like to see if they would be willing to make it available? And they did. So it's been done for a variety of reasons. And we have a number of you who've been talking to us or in process. There's been a lot of turnover in municipalities. So some of you may be on this list and say, I didn't know I opted into PACE. That's been a little bit of the struggle we've had trying to keep, everybody informed as, staff turns over at municipalities, people change jobs. But if you're on this list, we're always happy to talk to you and get you back up to speed in terms of PACE in your community. Next slide, please. This is not intended to be a slide that daunts you, or it's really intended to show that mass development facilitates the transaction in terms of the betterment assessment being placed at closing. What's intended here, or what's represented here, are the actions undertaken during a commercial PACE financing and closing in terms of an action undertaken by mass development or a document that needs to be signed by the related entity. So you can digest this later on when you have time. But again, I'm emphasizing mass development's in the middle. If you're a municipality, you have a question, that's who you come to, and that's what we'll work through with you. Next slide, please. So that's my information. Logan, I'm sure you'll get that out to everyone in the crowd, and I'll leave the questions to the end, but thank you. Hopefully I didn't rush through quickly on all those slides.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Wendy. That was great. So I'm going to just change slides really quick. Just give me 1 second. Perfect. And so I am going to pass things over to our next presenter, who is Carol Collins. She is the Director of Energy and Sustainability at the City of Greenfield. And their mission is to improve energy efficiency of municipal properties and implement clean and renewable energy projects to achieve green communities goals, the community's vision for sustainable Greenfield, and to expand Greenfield's prominence as a leader in sustainability. And I will just share, and I'm sure Carol will get into this, you know, part of that effort included Greenfield being one of the first communities to opt into the PACE program. So thank you so much, Carol. And with that, I will let you take it away.
Thank you so much, Logan. And thank you for the introduction and for inviting me here today. And I'm so grateful that Wendy went over all the financial kind of parts of PACE, because better her than me. My goal is to focus on the energy piece, and I think that's why a lot of people are here. So I wanted to share a little bit about what we did, and I will brag a little bit because we were the first PACE project in Massachusetts, and it is a perfect project. So we'll talk more about that later, but I just want to start by saying that Greenfield, we're a small and mighty town out here in Western Massachusetts, just under 18,000 people. And, it's been a big goal of the community and the administration to be a leader in energy and sustainability. So we've hit a lot of goals and targets, and we just continue to work on that front. So PACE is, as Logan aptly said, it's another tool that we have to use that's really critical to meeting further goals to save our climate. But one thing I just wanted to mention here were some of the highlights of projects that we've worked on, and we can go to the next slide. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the reasons that we adopted PACE, and as Wendy mentioned, there was a process in getting it to being unveiled, but our city and I think a lot of communities had been very interested in seeing what PACE could accomplish, because it had been used in other states. So we had been very eager to adopt it and use it to promote our commercial properties. So that was one of the reasons that we were on at the beginning of the adoption of PACE financing. And really, again, as Wendy mentioned, it's an economic development tool so that we can support our larger commercial properties to get them to be able to do projects that otherwise would not be possible, because it is difficult to get the financing. And again, that's all. But when we get to the fourth bullet point, that's where I come in. And I see it as an opportunity to work with commercial property owners that might not even be aware of what options are available to promote clean energy projects, building electrification, and by having an avenue that they can access funding to accomplish these projects, it really is critical to actually seeing them done. So in tandem with that, I just want to say that I think it's very important what I've seen. And I think I should just preface this, you know, we are a small community. We don't have a tremendous number of larger commercial projects that would be eligible for PACE, but we do want to help the ones that are eligible or are these larger projects, because it is such a big impact. And so we want to be able to not just, I think by having a really good team or consultants or contractors that you may already have experience with, or trying to gather that to try to link together property owners who don't have this knowledge, they're busy running their businesses, that they can get, you know, viable information and estimates and project scopes that they can use to move forward with the project, is really what I see as being very critical to the success of continuing with future projects. That said, that's just something I've kind of learned as I'm, you know, been working on this for a while with some different building owners. But I think Wendy did also allude to, and that there really is not much effort required from the municipality. Once we got it adopted, it was a matter of referring a business, you know, in this case, the project we'll see on the next slide, to MassDevelopment. They kind of took the lead from there. And then we really didn't have much involvement until the closing, which, you know, because MassDevelopment takes care of all those intermediary steps, which is fabulous. So I will say, it's funny because so many people are like, oh, you did the first PACE project. And I was like, if everything was this easy, I would be so grateful. It really was. I think I can honestly say the easiest. I don't know if I want to say easy. We were first, so there were some bumps along the way, but we did all that, so you don't have to, so you're welcome. And but as it is now, there should be very minimal involvement on the part of the municipality. And again, I did had one, yeah, we'll just go to the next slide, please. So I know Wendy showed this building, but it's so beautiful. I could look at it all day long. And on this slide, you get to see what it was. I mean, what an unbelievable transformation. And it's in our downtown business area. So it just really, I would say we couldn't have asked for a better project to be the first PACE project in Massachusetts. It's an all electric building. They did all kinds of, you know, tightening up, energy upgrades, solar to offset their consumption. It's absolutely gorgeous space. And it's now, not that that's my thing, but being on the tax rolls, I know hits a lot of buttons for the people that count the money. So it really is, I think, you know, I was really happy that it all worked out, and it just was a timing thing where it was right after we adopted PACE that this building owner came to me looking for some assistance. And so I was like, hey, you know, why don't you try this? And I hope we get to see lots more like it. And I think we will. And I encourage you all. That's the other thing. I would say, we can go to the next slide because I think I kind of summed it up. But you know, I did mention our administration was very eager to adopt PACE, you know, and it was a very strong leg of the administration's mission to support economic development. So you have that angle in addition to the great, phenomenal energy benefits that it can provide. MassDevelopment has been amazing in this whole process. They came out, gave us a presentation, kind of a longer version of what Wendy did that really just goes through every single point, very, you know, easy to follow. And I will add that where I wrote it down again, the commercial PACE structure, which was the last slide she showed, which had the flow diagram, that was my Bible that I kept on my desk like the whole time we were going through the process, because I was like, what do we, it's very accurate, very helpful, even though I look at those things and I think that they're not important. That one is, and it's very helpful. But the one thing I would say, again, since we've been through this process already, you know, it was really focused on involving, you know, the administration, economic development, my department. And since there is, at the end, the betterment assessment that needs to be build out. It does involve, and it may be different in other towns, but for us, it's our assessor and our treasurer collector. So I would recommend that for any communities that are considering it and about to embark on the process, I think it'd be really helpful to at least bring them in to introduce the concept before you get to a point where you have a project and it's like, oh, by the way. So in hindsight, I think that would have been, I would just recommend thinking of that kind of more comprehensive approach. And then as far as getting it adopted, again, if everything could have been this smooth and quick, I would have been so grateful. It was a fairly abbreviated process, but I took the lead at the mayor's request to educate the city council and put out information. Most of it was what MassDevelopment had provided because it was so well presented and answered any questions. We discussed it at the various, appropriate meetings, and it was unanimously adopted back in 2018. So I would say that what also is great about it, I don't know, I know it's tough to take on more when we're all so overburdened, but in terms of like, it's now just a tool that's in our toolbox. It's nothing that you need to do anything about once you adopt it. It's a matter of your involvement with getting people to the program and to MassDevelopment. And again, for us, it's been an incredible way to try to support businesses to doing things that, when they're already on board and they want to do, a BRF system, or they want to do, energy upgrades, that's fabulous. But when they're just sort of like, I need to upgrade my HVAC, I see that as a huge opportunity where communities can really have an impact by connecting them to the right resources, to showing them what's possible. And we're getting to a point where we have to do this at every turn. The incentives are fabulous across all sectors. So let's get her done. I think I'll stop there. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Carol. It was a helpful perspective, and I think worth noting that, that there was such good collaboration across, MassDevelopment and the city, both in the adoption process and after that. So I think at this point I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and we're going to get into some of the questions. I saw that there were quite a few that were coming through. So I will try to find a few of those and make sure that we are addressing some of your questions. After I get through some of the questions that have been on the chat, we will then open it up to see if anyone wants to unmute themselves and ask a question. So the first one that I'm going to go to is from Maggie. And she asks, can large laboratories take advantage of PACE?
Yes, they can.
Perfect. Yeah, I don't know if you want to add at all, if there's been any interest from labs, or if that's something, an entity in particular that you've seen a lot of engagement with PACE.
Sure. So yes, and laboratories are big power users. They have a challenge in terms of their operations. They can't just stop whatever they're doing, because usually it's critical. It's a laboratory to do an energy improvement. That seems to be more of the challenge for a laboratory to do a project from my perspective. And once they identify the funding, at least, then they can put a time frame in when they maybe have a tenant move out. As that really seems to be, and that's what PACE brings you, kind of that one shot. When they can do it, here it is, and they have the funding.
Perfect. And another question that I think kind of ties into like how PACE relates to other funding opportunities available. So Alyssa asks, can PACE be used with other funding sources such as LIHTC or historic tax credits?
Yes. So PACE is great because it's complementary to those. It really adds on top of those incentives, rebates, tax credits that may also be available to then come in as the last part of that funding or financing that's needed. So that's actually a requirement and a good point, that we require the property owner to access any incentives or rebates that they can obtain locally or nationally before they come to us for the financing amount.
That's great. And again, it just incentivizes looking for those incentives, which is important. This is something that MCAN hears quite a bit, but and I'll be curious to get your thoughts on this, Wendy. I think I know the answer, but James asks, can municipalities access it for things like upgrading HVAC at schools? And he adds, it's a little bit weird of a process, but you know, as far as like billing themselves for the betterment.
So unfortunately, no, because municipalities cannot receive a tax bill, just that we haven't found a way that works. They cannot. But they funny enough, they know the benefits because they have seen contracts that pay themselves back through doing these improvements, and they're looking for financing actually. But municipalities are really the only ones who cannot access PACE.
Got it. Great. And this is another fascinating question from David. He asks, can several entities get together to meet the 250K minimum for the CPACE to participate in PACE?
So this is financing that's tied to the land. It's actually tied to a parcel of land legally. So an owner who owns the parcel is really the one undertaking the financing. So I don't think I can see a situation where that would work, where you'd have a different owners with different parcels, I'm assuming, participating. But we're always happy to talk through a situation with someone if they have something like that. But I would say generally no.
Okay. Perfect. And this is a question I think it'll be good for both of you to answer, but how do property owners hear about PACE once a community opts in? Does MassDevelopment do outreach, or do are communities the ones who do outreach? And this is from Shelley. I think, Wendy, it'd be great to hear kind of what MassDevelopment does, if there is anything. And then I'd love to get your thoughts, Carol, on kind of some good practices or what you've seen work in your community.
Sure. So MassDevelopment is a statewide organization. We have regional teams in the central, greater Boston, west, south, and north region. And they're actually on the ground working with the local communities. And those are some of the staff you may already be familiar with. And they promote all the MassDevelopment programs, including PACE. So they're out talking to the wide range of property owners, developers about all their needs. And if energy happens to come in the conversation, you know, PACE is definitely mentioned and talked about. And so I would say that's probably our primary vehicle. We also have our website. We have a number of other promotional tools that we use, but I'll let Carol kind of talk about, I think, how, you know, that ties into the municipal efforts.
Yeah, I'm actually trying to remember, because I think I know we did press releases. We got the word out that way. But because this kind of overlaps with a lot of departments, it really seems to be beneficial to come from economic development avenues. So I know it was brought to different networks where there's, you know, like business associations, things of that nature. And, you know, we have it on our website. And also for me, it's when I'm working with people, or if I hear about a project, I'll contact a business owner to just be like, hey, what are you thinking about doing on this front? And have you heard about PACE? And try to give them an introduction. So that's part of the, you know, it hasn't been anything comprehensive, but it's been, I think, spread around on different audiences to try to reach everyone.
And I will just step in here and say, you know, for folks who are community members or advocates on a call, this is another way, you know, where you know, we can play a role. And if your community has opted in, you know, there are several strategies of just letting the commercial property owners in your community know, hey, this exists, this is happening, and here are some of the benefits, and here's who you might want to talk to if you're interested. I think that, especially once we ask for this from our municipality, we can really partner with our local government to spread the word and to make sure that all of the big actors in our community know that this is, is something that's available to them. So this is a question from Byrne, and it gets a little bit more into the nitty gritty of kind of the financing and the cost to municipalities. He asked, what are the real costs for the municipality? Is the tax base for PACE buildings reduced for the betterment?
So, in my eyes, there really is no risk and cost to the municipality, because we are having the borrower or MassDevelopment incur the costs as part of the transaction, whether it's the lien recording fees, the financing fees, those are all borne by the borrower. We are asking the municipality to facilitate it, so there is some staff time. But in terms of actual costs, no. In the tax base question, what I can say is the projects that are being done are improving the buildings in your community, the commercial properties. It obviously depends on the improvements that are being made. All improvements are valued differently. But if a new roof is being installed as part of the project, I'll take that as one example. I think you can, take into account in your own view how that improves the property and the asset, the saleability of a property in the future, and how that translates into value. So we don't weigh in on tax values or the impact on a tax base, but I would just say generally this improves the property because the energy improvements are fixed and not ever leaving the property.
Great. Is there anything you wanna add to that, Carol?
I was trying to remember, and yes, outside of staff time, which again, is really, I would say, fairly minimal. There's not any, definitely no hard costs, and again, I would say fairly limited investment of even staff time.
And this again gets back to the benefit of this program is, very, very rarely is there a program that provides so many potential benefits that really does not incur any or very minimal cost to the municipal government. So it's one of the reasons why we're so excited about this. I see a question from Eric, who asks, does it make sense to design plus engineer the project first or find the third-party funder first? Also, are there funders with tax appetite for solar? I'm not sure if that's a question or that's something that Wendy, but
I would say they're concurrent processes. So they're designing and constructing the project, but they need to know how much they can borrow. And they need to know the limit. So when they're doing that, they need to identify the lender and have an initial conversation about their credit and their borrowing ability in order to kind of craft the project. If they can only afford so much, they don't want to waste their resources on developing a project they can't afford. So they run together. And I'm sorry, I don't know if I answered the second question, Logan, or.
Not a problem. I think that was kind of, there was a question about, are there funders with a tax appetite for solar? I'm not sure if that's something that you're kind of aware of.
So that really only comes into play if you're a nonprofit and you can't take advantage of the tax credits, I believe. And so you'd have to get a third party to really, I think, maximize the value, but that isn't really part of the PACE equation, I think, in terms of our program.
Excellent. And Carol, I'd be curious if you wanted to also weigh into that as far as, what in the case that you outlined in Greenfield, was this kind of happening all at once, or was there something that came before the other steps?
So again, I want to say I was not, once the property owner went to, I think he had a vision, and I know he had talked to some people, but I know that was actually, I know that PACE financing is what made his project possible. There was no way he would have been able to do what he wanted to do without that. So again, being the first project and there were things being worked out at the state level, it might not be the most representative, but I don't know all the specific steps he took. I know that for him, I helped him try to connect to different contractors to get things done, but he really had his own vision. He was working with a fabulous architect who was really knowledgeable. So again, I think, I don't know if it's not answering what comes first, but I do think it is the development of the project. You have to develop that. And so having great contractors and vendors and consultants can really make the difference to leveraging and maximizing PACE and what can be done.
I think I could add a little bit to that too, Logan. Once Greenfield made it available, the property owner would check in with us from time to time on eligibility, what he was thinking, can I include this? This is my new time frame, and things were just affecting the project all along, including COVID that came along. What this owner did is identified PACE as longer term financing that could combine the shorter term bridge construction financing that he took out initially to do the initial renovation of the building. So, what he needed was a longer term solution. He knew he had a time frame to meet, so he used alternative means to do the entire renovation, which definitely wasn't financed entirely by PACE. He had used a combination of financing options, but PACE allowed him to take the energy improvements and move them into a financing longer term once the building was constructed, and basically alleviate that burden of the funds that he was paying on the shorter term.
Great. I'm going to ask just one more short question, and then I think we will go ahead and wrap it up. But Susan asks, is the 250,000 a hard minimum? And she alludes to maybe a smaller nonprofit not needing that much. So are there any exceptions that can be made to that minimum, Wendy?
There are. That's a number we came up with. It made sense. It is a more complex financing, as I think most of you have understood from this program, because it involves a municipality and an assessment. So that's the number we put out there. But we're absolutely happy to talk to a property owner who wants to try to use it for something of a lesser amount if it makes sense.
Perfect. Well, I so appreciate both of your willingness to do some rapid fire questions. I know we did not get to every single question, but we certainly did get to quite a few. So I just want to thank you both so much for participating today. I think we learned quite a bit. And I do also just want to ask if there are communities that are interested in learning more, that haven't yet engaged with MassDevelopment, who should they reach out to? Should they reach out directly to you, Wendy, or should they someone else?
They can reach out directly to me via email, or they can reach out through our PACE landing page. We have an email box there that you can send general inquiries to. And we are ramping up our efforts as well as PACE becomes more popular. So we'll have someone specifically, probably not me, directly responding to your inquiry if you want to use PACE in your municipality or opt in.
Excellent. Well, thank you all so much for attending. I hope that this has been informative. I hope that this has kind of shown just how beneficial this program can be to a community. If you have any questions, as was mentioned, feel free to reach out to PACE. MCAN is also happy to play the role of connector if you want to reach out to us. But this program really is quite beneficial. And so I hope that you all will consider looking into it if you are a municipal official, or will consider asking your elected officials and your staff members in your city and town to look at PACE and to see whether or not it works in your community. So with that, I will close things out. Thank you so much again for coming. And I hope you all have a wonderful, wonderful afternoon.